Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's UDC Library webinar, AI and Everyday Life. My name is Megan Kowalski. I am the UDC Outreach and Reference Librarian, and I will be presenting today's session. Thank you for joining us today. We are in the middle of our Modern Literacy webinar series, and we have 3 more sessions coming up, one on deep fakes, one on how not to get scammed, and a final one on developing cozy online habits. In addition to those, we also have an upcoming webinar on the difference between our FSTA database and why it might be better to use than AI. So it is related to this series, and you can sign up for any of those on our library website. Today's session is being recorded, and we will have time for questions at the end, both recorded and unrecorded. But if a question comes to you as I'm presenting today, please don't hesitate to drop it in the chat, and I'll answer it as I can get to it. So here's what we're looking at today. What is AI? Where do you find it? How it works generally, and then some tips on spotting AI and why that matters. We're also going to wrap up with some pros and cons of AI and, as I mentioned, time for questions at the end. So let's get started with what is AI? The simple definition is that artificial intelligence, or AI, refers to computer systems trained to recognize patterns and make predictions based on data. AI doesn't necessarily think or understand like humans, but it processes large amounts of information quickly and applies patterns it has learned so it can come across as if it is thinking. You can think of AI kind of like an autopilot on an airplane. It can handle certain tasks automatically, but it doesn't actually know where it is going without some human guidance. And for the purposes of this presentation, we are focusing on 2 specific kinds of AI. The first is narrow AI, and these are everyday tools built into so many things around us. And these types of AI are designed to do one thing really well. Then there's also Gen AI or generative AI, and these are chat services or search services designed to create new material from a massive corpus of data that it has been trained on. So, where are some cases you can find these kinds of AI? Well, it's basically everywhere. So, in our communication tools, things like autocorrect and predictive text are a form of narrow AI. So are email spam filters. You help train it whenever you say, no, this is spam. In our entertainment services, Netflix recommendations or any streaming service recommendations are AI. Some Spotify designed playlists are also AI. And the TikTok feeds, the algorithm in that is a kind of AI you have trained. We also find AI in our productivity tools, things like voice assistants, or if you have an Alexa device at home, those are a form of AI. Automatic transcription services are also AI. Same thing with grammar checkers. You will also find a ton of AI in our tech services. If you have a smart thermostat in your home, that is a kind of narrow AI. Robot vacuums, particularly the ones that, map your space when it's doing its work, those are a form of AI. And if there are security cameras in your area with facial recognition or motion tracking capture, those are a kind of AI. And then, because we're a library for a university, campus life, things like plagiarism checkers, library databases, and research tools like Semantic Scholar all have some form of AI built into those systems. And there are 3 major components of the tech behind how AI works. The first is algorithms, and you can think of this like a recipe. An algorithm is a step-by-step set of instructions designed by the company that owns that AI. So, just like a cookie recipe, you have to follow the steps in order to get cookies. AI algorithms are recipes that tell the computer how to look at data and make predictions. The second part is the data, and these are the ingredients within that recipe. The more and higher quality the data, the better the recipe of the algorithm turns out. Most Gen AI was trained on massive amounts of data that was scraped or stolen. So this is something to consider in your work. And if you ever have any questions about the ethics of using AI, we did a webinar on that last year, and the recording is available on our YouTube page. And this data that the AI is trained on comes with the existing biases of that data. So if an autocorrect is trained mostly on English, it'll struggle with things like slang and names or non-English words. It's also why it gets names wrong all of the time when you're doing generative AI. And AI systems are supposed to improve as they get more data, but it also means if that data continues to be wrong or biased, that will affect the outcome of anything created by that AI. And the third major part of AI is training or practice. AI models are trained kind of like athletes. They just repeatedly analyze examples until they get good enough at recognizing patterns. For example, an AI image recognition might look at thousands of photos labeled dogs and cats until it really learns how to spot the difference between a dog and a cat when it goes to generate those images. And so AI doesn't really think. It's a pattern recognition machine. It takes the data and finds the patterns within it, create what it needs, or to accomplish the task it was designed for. So while humans can think and reason and imagine and understand context, AI, on the other hand, identifies statistical patterns and predicts the most likely step. So, for example, if Spotify suggests a song for you, it's because other people liked that song as well. It doesn't know your taste. It just predicts because other people like this song, you will like it too. But AI does have some strengths. It can handle huge amounts of data extremely quickly. It's also very good at repetitive pattern-based tasks like sorting and predicting and generating pretty basic material. But the limitations of AI is that it doesn't understand meaning the way that humans do. It can also produce errors or hallucination based on the results if the data itself is flawed, or if it doesn't quite yet have enough data in there to figure out what would come next in its prediction model. And so remember, AI is only as good as the data and instructions behind it. So garbage in, garbage out. The more work that went into designing and training the AI model, the better it will operate in the long run. And spotting AI matters because AI is everywhere. It is now woven into everyday tools like text messages and email filters and recommendation systems. It seems that every day, every tech company is coming out with ooh, look at our brand new AI tool. And most of this can feel harmless or maybe even helpful. But as AI gets better at generating realistic text, images, audio, and video, it becomes harder to tell the difference between what is real and what's synthetic. And so here's quick tips to figuring out what is AI when it comes to text. So first, does that written text come across as overly polished or generic in tone? Essentially, does it read like if it just sounds average or predictable, it's possible it was Gen AI. You're also going to look for repetition of phrases or unusual word choices because AI is just predicting this is the word that would come next. It's not necessarily understanding the overall context. AI also has a tendency to be wordy and use a lot of big vocabulary words because it was trained on a lot of writing. It is also going to lack personal anecdotes, emotion, or lived experience. Particularly, if you are trying to get something generated about a personal experience, your brain is not in that AI, so it's not going to be included. And AI is also going to give answers that sound confidently wrong. These are the AI hallucinations. AI is kind of like a toddler. They think they know everything, but they know nothing. They're just repeating things and they're very firm in their beliefs. Also, AI is designed to be relentlessly positive. It's going to support you no matter what you say. So even if you say be really critical when reviewing this, it's going to be like, okay, here's how you can make it better, but you are awesome. It is designed to be an upbeat cheerleader because that's what keeps bringing people back to these tools. And here are some tips for how to decide if something is AI when it comes to images. First, you're going to want to look at the limbs. Are there strange hands or fingers? Is there an extra limb floating around, not attached to anyone? You can also note things like mismatched accessories. One earring is one shape, one earring is another shape, or even in the eyes, are the eyes two different colors? You're also going to see some odd backgrounds or nonsensical details. So signs with gibberish text, distorted buildings, or if you're saying, oh, look, I want a winter picture, but in the back they put a palm tree, that can be a sign that it was generated by AI. AI generated images are also going to have an overly polished look. Think perfect lighting, flawless faces, symmetrical features. Basically, it looks like it's been through a perfection filter, and the colors and the lighting and everything is just going to look overly enhanced. And you also want to pay attention to the shadows. AI doesn't quite know yet how to figure out shadows in images, so you're going to see the sun or the lighting source might be coming from every different direction. So always pay attention to the shadows. But why does this matter? Well, it's easier and easier every day to fall for AI. Messaging and scams, a lot of those are started with AI. And that's why we're doing a session later on how to not get scammed. And this means information literacy and critical thinking skills are more important than ever because you're going to need to figure out what is real. Plus, AI policies are behind the times. Institutions, laws, and government move extremely slowly. In fact, policies related to social media are still working their way through Capitol Hill. So it's going to be even longer for us to get to something like AI. And so, if AI content floods everything, how do we separate fact from fabrication? This is what we call the enshittification of the internet. Everything is getting just a little bit worse every day because AI is just designing slop. It's just putting stuff out there to put stuff out there. And we humans are making it even worse by creating all of this AI content that we share. And so eventually, this is going to erode trust where people aren't quite sure what is real or not anymore. But there are some pros of AI. First is accessibility. These tools make it easier for people who have different learning or accessibility needs to get what they need. So AI can now read screens much more easily. It can add captions to videos. It can make things large print. All of these accessibility tools are a lot more available to people to do what they need to make their lives easier. It can also be a creative brainstorming boost because AI doesn't necessarily have the guardrails of what would be considered normal. If you're looking for a brainstorming buddy, AI can be good because it's just going to throw stuff out there because it doesn't care what is right or wrong. And it can provide productivity boosts to a point. There are some simple tasks it can do very easily, designing spreadsheets. It can help a little bit with coding, but those productivity boosts really only occur if you already know what you're doing. Because the easiest way to employ AI in your life is to use it as a tool, because that's what it is. It is a tool. And some AI tools out there are making little bits of science faster. It can decode large amounts of data very quickly. So instead of humans having to go through and doing all of this data analysis, AI can take the first stab. And in some instances, it's producing science at a remarkable rate. For instance, it used to take a human years to figure out protein folds. I don't know what protein folds are, but AI can now do it in roughly a day. So we're making a lot of moves in that area. Now, a trained scientist still needs to review that data to make sure that the AI found was correct, but not having to get into the nitty gritty of these massive data sets is helping science to some extent. But there are also risks with AI. And the first one is it's reinforcing our information bias. Algorithms feed you content based on what you already engage with. And generative AI is going to continue to feed you stuff based on what you have put in there before. And so what I see on the internet is not necessarily what someone else sees. And this in our highly polarized world is getting a little bit harder simply because we're not all seeing the same thing. So it's starting to create these almost separate realities that we are all living in. AI will also feed our confirmation bias because, as I mentioned earlier, it is relentlessly positive. And so it's just going to feed into stuff it already thinks you want to hear. And that makes misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda a lot easier to feed onto the internet. And this is why deep fakes are dangerous because people are already thinking, I already agree with this. AI is making all of this. And now it's just reinforcing all of that bad information that's out there. Again, it's making truth a little iffy because we can't all agree on what is fact versus what is fiction. There's also concerns about privacy. What you feed in there is training those data models. And so if you're not careful, you could be feeding the AI incredibly sensitive information that could later be used in a data breach or to, steal your identity. In some instances, it's making it easier to dox people since all of this information is already freely available on the web. So you do have to be careful about what you put into AI because what you put in there is going to be used in that training data set. And so safety is a concern. A major concern of AI is there aren't too many guardrails with it yet, and people have committed suicide based on something AI has told them. And so you have to be really aware of what you're working with. AI is not human, it is not thinking, it is not feeling. It is a predictive model. So just be aware of when you're using these tools, what you are putting into it, and be very realistic about what it's putting out at you, simply because those guardrails are not in place. And so some of the things I want you to take away from this brief webinar is that AI is already everywhere and it's going to increase every day. Like I said, all of these tools are rolling out day after day after day. And AI is powerful, but its use is limited. It is a tool, nothing more and nothing less. So treat it like the tool it is. AI is more like email than it is like a thinking human. And so we also need awareness to use it responsibly. Because while AI is useful in many places, you do have to consider what are the ethics of this and is what I'm putting in here, going to have a useful, productive outcome, or is this something that could hurt me in the long run? So just be aware of those things. And we've done a whole series of webinars on the ethics of AI and how to use AI, and those are available on our YouTube page. And so I know today's session was brief, but this is why we're doing this, just to give you a little taste of all of these things. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us or reach out to us for our online chat. We do appointments both in person and online, or you can just walk into the UDC library and talk to any of our librarians. Just like you, we're learning more about these tools every day. So we're more than happy to point you in the right direction just to learn more. And now I'm happy to open it up to questions. We'll start with questions recorded, but I will give time for questions unrecorded at the end. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself. All right, not seeing anything. I do want to say thank you for attending today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and give time for unrecorded questions.